Hey everybody, it's Monster back in with Opus Gaming, and I'm here today to bring you guys my white temple list that I was able to take first place with at my locals this past weekend, actually. This list has been really cool. I think white temple is actually a pretty cool meta contender where it really balances the good parts of white aggro and the good parts of white control, and it has a lot of good meta matchups in my opinion. But this is a list that I actually really plan to continue to develop, and currently it does have all of my TP01 stuff and a full side deck, but just things that I plan to change for the future. So before getting too deep into the deck profile and talking about my plans for the future, my plans for the deck, if you guys aren't subbed, drop a sub down below. You guys already know we're on our way to 1,000 subscribers. Once we do cross 1,000 subscribers, we're gonna be doing a really big giveaway. So if you're not subbed, you haven't seen my content, drop a sub down below. And if you're here just to support, leave a like, leave a comment. All that stuff really does help a lot. Helps us get on the algorithm. But coming up here in the next few days, for sure, we're gonna be dropping a short that's gonna have some information about some of the Battle Spirit Saga stuff that we're giving away. It's gonna be a little bit of the information that we're gonna be doing a bigger info drop once we hit 750 subscribers, but just letting you guys know all that stuff right away. But yeah, let's get into the deck profile right now. I'll go through the deck profile portion of the video just kind of level by level. So we'll start off with our weenies, which are going to be one automatic gunner, one satellite falcon, and then just two mecha winged ducks. So it's just going to be 4 slots for the super low cheap cost free to play cards. They're all really nice, and it's actually nice to see them all in different portions of the game, so we're going to be increasing this number in general. But just having 2 Mecha Wing Duck and dropping this on like a Buffalong Bill or something like that forces your opponent to either remove the Mecha Wing Duck before the attack step or go into the attack step knowing that they're going to lose extra resource, and then you're also going to be ramping some cores to be able to play your bigger cards going into late game safer. So really liking the Mecha Wing Duck, but these 2 cards are in archetype, so they're going to fall in line with the Mecha cards and turn on your Mecha effects, as well as they drop as free drops. They hold cores really well, so they can go up to some decent numbers like 4K, 5K, and they can just be utilized in the early game as just nice attackers, or in the mid game as a decent chunky attacker to force your opponent either into blocks that they don't want, or to turn on to hold cores so that you have some defensive plays as well, so you're not just walled out. Moving into our 3 drops, we have 4 Hollow Beast Glass Bear and 2 Heavy Tank Curiosity. Loving both of these cards in the list. The Heavy Tank Curiosity comes in as a staple for your purple matchups, just because it makes your mechas able to block against Curse, which can be really hard when Curse is just kind of swinging in for early aggro, going into a position where they can just kind of swing, remove a bunch of cards from your side of the board, and then drop a bunch of cards. So this card kind of helps mitigate that. It's a really nice early defensive card, but it's not as nice defensively as the Hollow Beast Glass Bear. This card really gets you someplace, which is nice, which really gets you into position of ramping into cores so you can drop your mid game cards. Most of the important and impactful cards in this game kind of come in that 4 cost, 5 cost, and 6 cost range. So being able to hit those without having a lot of core reduction or dumping a whole bunch of cores from your reserve to your trash is super nice by not having to pay so much. So ramping in the early game, having this kind of come in at 3K and possibly wall out your opponent's 3K and 4K and less attacks is nice, or if you have to trade it just to kind of get a foot in the door or a foot up without losing too much in life. So been loving Hollow Beast Glass Bear, and it's been honestly overperforming. I wish I could play more than 4, but that's just the limit. All right, let's just make sure you guys can see everything over here. Going into our other 4 cost cards, we're going to start off with Valkyrie Mist. This card's amazing. It's going to be one of the biggest tempo cards in the deck. It really comes down and helps you bounce anything 7 or less is its effect, but it really helps you bounce your opponent's cards that they're going to be using for reductions. So if you're kind of building a board and you know that you have a really good defensive card like a Suppression or Absolute Ice Shield, you can drop this card knowing that you're just going to swing with this, bounce part of your opponent's board, force them into a block that isn't super nice for them, and make it so that they don't have as much bounce back for their next turn. Valkyrie Mist has been coming in and overperforming. I think in my very first list I played this at 3 of, but it's an amazing 4 of, and it's been really nice. Next up, we have the most important 4 drops. We have 4 Axebiter, but we also have 4 Greg Armor. We'll start off with Greg Armor, actually. This card is going to be a 4 cost card with red and white armor, which is going to be nice against the 2 most aggro decks, which is going to be red and white aggro, the Terrasaur and then the white aggro. The place that this card kind of does lack is against purple. We have so many other cards that do help us against purple that it doesn't matter too much. This card comes in and really does help you wall off. If you have enough cores to sit on this card, it can wall off against like a 6K Terrasaur attack from the Dino Man, or it can stave off your opponent being able to do things like Volcanic Break this card, or the other card, Burning Force. There we go. But the place that it's really nice is walling off white aggro. This card can't be Valkyrie Mist, and this card can't be Dream Bomb. So when your opponent does have a white board and they know that they're going to have to be swinging in every turn and losing 1 card per turn, and they're not going to be able to just drop the Valkyrie Mist, this card comes in and does a lot of work. So I've been really liking Greg Armor. The biggest thing about it is just kind of seeing it at the time that you need to see it. So Next up, we have 4 Axebiter. This card has been amazing. People kind of have been asking me how I feel about it at 4, if it can be played at less than 4. What I would say is that it really depends on your list. If your list is super aggro, you probably won't be able to afford playing into this card. But my list is really focused on being able to go into the mid and the late game with a really decent defensive sequencing and defensive phasing. So I've been enjoying Axebiter. I've noticed that if you just slam this down in any matchup, even purple, they can just get rid of it with enough resource dedicated to it. So it's about dropping it in times where the resource that you get from having this on board is greater than the resource that your opponent gets by removing it. If this card's your only card on board, it's not going to do as much work. But if your opponent has to use a bunch of resources to get this card off the board, but then they're still dealing with like a Gray Armor and a Heavy Tank Curiosity, you can kind of wall your opponent out, right, until you get into a space where you're dropping enough cards that your opponent can't deal with it, and they can't deal with this every turn. So this card is a card that comes onto the board and is a sticky body, and that's really important right now, especially with the aggro matchups. A lot of time against aggro, you can get to 1 or 2 bodies and then drop that card for cheap and core it up right away, right? Because if you're sitting on that and kind of a decent setup, like a suppression or something like that, you can really just wall your opponent out for 1 turn, going into the next turn, and just kind of ramp your turns, right, turn by turn, and building a board that your opponent can't deal with. Now that we're moving out of the Axebiter, because honestly, this deck could also be called Axebiter Midrange. That's another name for it. But moving into the bounce control part of it again is going to be the 5-cost Fortress God Knight Odin type X. This card's amazing. It bounces one of your opponent's cards at levels 2 and 3 that costs 3 or less. And at level 1, it'll refresh itself if you have a Nexus on the board. All of those effects are really nice, but it's just really nice bouncing your opponent's 3-cost cards. It is really effective against like Purple Curse if they're swinging with like a Dragon Naga or a the Camelot Knight. If they're swinging with either of those cards, you can really just bounce those back in your hand and kind of deal with those like that, and your opponent has to rebuild a board against you. But against a lot of times, it's about the tempo. So having this card be an attack or block effect is actually crazy. Moving into the 6th drop here, which is going to be its partner in crime, another 3-of Buffalong Bill. Buffalong Bill has been overperforming in this deck, to say the least, and it's been really nice to see. I love its effect because it turns on at level 1, and that's the most important thing. If you have just 1 card on board, or even if you just have 2 cards on board and it's a nice setup for you, you can pay the 4 cores in like an earlier mid game and just sit on this card at 1 core. If your opponent doesn't have core removal, this card will most likely survive the turn, as well as put in a really big wall for your opponent to get off, just because its effect is on at level 1, and it doesn't demand the cores like Fortress Knight God type X. So if you're dropping this card on a board that has been broken by your opponent, this card's a little bit better than Fortress God type Odin type X. Oh my god, that's going to trip me up for the whole video. But if you have a board that is established already, I've noticed that Fortress God is just a nicer drop. So they balance each other out really well. I really like Buffalong Bill. I think I'm going to put it up to a 3-of actually, because a 4-of, sorry, because I enjoy it that much, but it's been putting in a lot of work. So Dinosaur Harrier Turbo X. This card is decent. It has a lot of situations where it comes down and it feels like it's the best card in the game. And then there's other situations where you bring this down and it gets either not necessarily removed right away, but it just doesn't do enough for how much it costs you to put on the board. So the number one thing that this card has taught me is weighing out the resources that I'm going to gain from summoning this card compared to the resources that my opponent's going to utilize or lose by me controlling their attack step and what I have to drop. Sometimes this card is really nice if you have a good hand to combo it with, or a good board to combo it with. But if this is your 1 card, it kind of comes in as your 5th and 6th copies of Dream Bomb, and that's not always super utilizable. So just something to think about with Turbo Rex. Moving on to our 8 costs, we're getting into our top end of our magic stuff. So this is going to be kind of wrapping up what the deck does, but next up we have Numengard. Numengard is going to be the card that you're kind of looking for going into your late game. Once you have an established 2 or 3 cards on board, you just want to start dropping the Numengard, and it comes in so nicely. It combos really nicely with your Nexus that we're going to be getting to. Combos really nicely if you're able to swing with a Buffalong Bill with 4 cores on it, and then after you swing with that Buffalong Bill, you refresh everything, so you get 2 bounces off of that. That's just crazy value for this 1 card, and they all combo really nicely to hold cores, not force you to go super wide, not force you to be super susceptible to different types of removal or battle tricks, and all these cards really help you be like fluid to deal with any type of board that your opponent tries to set up. So really enjoying the Numengard. Sorry, we'll try to get this down here. You really can't tell any of the card arts once their main part is covered up, so sorry about that. We'll actually bounce these guys up here and we can start doing a top row. Moving into the rest of our top end, we have Armored Dragon Ship Enterprise. This card is really, really good. It comes down and it theoretically really walls out the white removal cards that your opponent has for your low-end cards and protects you from removal. So once you have a board, you just continue to build it. But this card, it's not perfect. It can be Exhaust Nexus. It can be Curse Dragon comboed, and sliding into this really does put you into kind of a vulnerable place if your opponent does have the correct removal, because you think that when you drop this, it costs a lot of resource, right? So you're thinking that you're setting up a board that your opponent isn't going to be able to really deal with, and if your opponent is able to deal with it, you've spent so much that it kind of can come back to bite you in the ass. So this card is an amazing top end. It really does help, especially in the white matchup. This is the only reason I won my white matchup today in the tournament, or not today, but this last weekend in the tournament. And it definitely did come in and perform, but I can see a world where you kind of decide and you just kind of take your opponent's removal and get a more tempo based version of the deck, and then you don't run something like this because it's so far ahead of the rest of your curve, or so much more expensive than the rest of your curve. The Newman Guard is kind of nice to drop down because it really comes down and you can spend all your cores and get all your cores back. But if you spend all your cores on this, you don't really get them back unless you have Infinity Mothership. This card is amazing. This is the Nexus that combos with the decks really well, and this is the reason I built this deck like this. This is the reason for like the Satellite Falcon and the Automatic Gunner coming in the first place, and then they kind of came in and did more than I thought that they would, so it's really nice. But playing 2 of it seems like the perfect number. I see it enough. I can drop this in the mid game, or I can drop it in the early game. If you drop this in the early game, it can combo with some of your magic cards, your white magic cards that can like bounce or restand your cards, like Regain, if you have a card on board already, like a Satellite Falcon. But yeah, no, this card is just really good. It's a nice Nexus. It's really nice at 2 of, and I wouldn't really increase the number. So moving into the magic cards, we have 2 Regain. This is a card that is fantastic. Tapping out all your cards on an offensive step and then resending like a Buffalo Bill in the defense, blocking out a card, killing it, and then bouncing something else is some tempo swing that your opponent just sometimes can't come back from. So I've been really enjoying the Regain. It doubles as a card that can help you OTK your opponent in the mid-range portion of the deck as well. The superstar of the deck is Suppression. You Suppression into Axebiter and just wall your opponent out for an entire turn. It's just as good as Ice Shield. And yeah, Suppression is amazing. You can use it in other ways as well. Sometimes I use it to buff my creatures. 90% of the times that I use it to buff my creatures offensively, I regret it. So if you're going to take any tips from this, just hold the Regain, or hold the Suppression, just use it defensively unless you're going to win on that turn. Moving into Dream Bomb, this card, I haven't mentioned this card in the defensive sequencing with like when I'm talking about Axebiter or Greg Armor and stuff like that, or Buffalo Bill even with Suppression is crazy. But Dream Bomb is amazing. Dream Bomb with Turbo Rex is an insane combo. You force your opponent to attack with something weenie, you block it and kill it, but then in the flash step, you bounce the card that they spent most of their cores to summon that turn, and you feel like you just get crazy value. It helps so much with the mid-range deck. It helps so much with the mid-range matchup and the control matchup. But even against aggro, if your opponent is kind of going into the mid and the late game and you've burnt through most of their resources, so they're just like barely clawing on, Dream Bomb's going to come down and completely shatter their setup. When you're playing the mirror match, if your opponent has a Axebiter and an Infinity Mothership setup, you set the Dream Bomb and then you just completely shatter their setup. It's really nice, as well as you shatter Newman Guards coming down. So it's one of the cards that when you're playing white, you're always thinking about, because you're like, dang, if I get Dream Bombed right here, I lose so much value with so many cards. So I love it as a 4 of. So we got to put the Hollow Ice Shield on top. Sorry guys. And then we have 4 Ice Shield. The 4 Ice Shield comes in. It's really nice. It's the staple in the meta for anything that's either mid-range or going for the long game, just kind of period. I have a video up in my shorts of some cards that you can swap this out for if you don't have access to Ice Shields, because they're pretty expensive right now. One of the cards is Suppression. So if you're already playing for Suppression, there are some other burst cards that can help you kind of stave off and just be a defensive piece in the deck. But this card is the defensive piece. A lot of times against some aggro lists and even just against some ramping lists, it literally comes down to how many Ice Shields you see in the matchup. So finishing off the deck list, we have 1 Volcanic Break and 2 Burning Force. Burning Force comes in, Nexus removal, which is really nice. It really keeps your opponent down. If you have like in the mid-range matchup or in the control matchup, if you have a Mothership set up and you have like a miss value, you bounce one of their cards and you pay the rest of your cores to play a Burning Force and get their Nexus off the board. You got 2 cards off their side of the board, which is 2 reduction. A lot of their plays are going to be kind of more tempo plays, so you just wall them out of the tempo that they had. Super nice, can keep you very safe and be really nice defensively. Volcanic Break comes in and it can kill some really important cards in different matchups. In the matchup against white, if they don't have the armored ship already on the board, this card can kill their Odin, this card can kill their Buffalong build, this card can kill like Mordreds, it can kill Calamity Beast in the yellow matchup or Bearded Eagle as well. It just kills a lot of cards, and I actually think this card is super underutilized right now, and people aren't really looking at it, but I think it's one of the best removal pieces. The only thing that it has against it is that it's only a removal piece. It doesn't double like Burning Force where it's Nexus or removal or anything like that, so it's really hard to slot in here, but it comes in and it really does remove some problem cards. So been really enjoying this card, and it's been really performing quite well. I'm going to clean this up really quick and just make a quick cut. We're going to cut over to the sideboard right now. All right, moving into the side deck portion, this was kind of just thrown together. I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of extra cards that I have in here. I wanted to keep, for this list only, I wanted to keep my side mostly focused on white, because white has so many in color, in archetype cards that just are already white that you can kind of build a side deck with just white cards that counter every single color. So that was the theme of this, and it's actually worked out really well. We're going to start off with Cannon Beats Hilo Mail. This card has been, it overperformed. I had it at 3 in my very first list, but I had to drop it down to 2 just because I didn't have enough variety. This card comes in against red Terrasaur and against white aggro, and just really helps slow them down. It does have armor purple, so you can bring it in against purple if you feel like you just need to bring in more spirits, but this card is just really nice. I like bringing it in those matchups, especially for aggro. It is expensive. It is more to like kind of finish aggro out and make it so that they can't continue to try to press you with just not enough attacks once you've kind of walled out some of their super early turns 1 and 2. But when this does come down in turns 3 and 4, it does work. So next up, we have Protection Aura. Protection Aura is the perfect response to when your opponent goes Exhaust Nexus and you have Axebiters on the board. This card will protect all your Axebiters for the first one, and if they want to spend enough quartz to drop the second one, usually they won't have enough. It depends on what portion of the game, but this card just comes in and really helps wall out against Exhaust Nexus. The more of these that you play, the more Exhaust Nexuses that your opponent will have to play to try to get any place against your board. But if you play like 1 or 2 of these, usually they kind of just stop right there, because it's going to be too much of an investment to go back and forth and guess how many that you have. Protection Aura has been really, really cool. I like it quite a bit. Next up, I've got 2 Head Ice Made Full. This is just for the purple matchup, just another card that can come in early, swing, won't get Mordred. It can be killed by Beldegorf, but if you have enough setup to kind of like respond to like the Beldegorf or anything like that, you can just kind of trick them into summoning the Beldegorf, and then when they summon the Beldegorf, you respond with a Counter Sword. Counter Sword is a 1 of. This is technically in for Seaworm and then purple in general. And then moving into Dream Blizzard, a lot of games I do just slide into 2 Dream Blizzards because most decks are relying on their Nexuses, and I can just pull one of my Nexuses out and just use my Nexus as either I do see it in the early game and just slam it, or just look for it in the late game, and it can still do a lot of work in the late game for me. So liking Dream Blizzard quite a bit. It does double as having a flash plus 3k, which is crazy, crazy nice right now. And then the last 2 cards we have Durm Dyna and Moonski. I wanted an alternate top end that I could just drop my 2 armored dragons for, and even though it's just 1 cost less, the 7 cost on these cards and the 3 reduction and 4 reduction respectively are really nice on these cards. They make them a little bit more accessible for the white matchup, and they're just a little bit better versus white than like Newman Guard. So I'll drop like 2 of these, or drop out 2 Newman Guard for 2 of these versus like a white matchup. But against something like maybe red aggro or white aggro, the armored dragon beast or something like that will come out, and these will come in if I feel like I'll still need a top in and a proper way to finish the game out. But I want something to kind of come out in that slot. So this was the sideboard I threw together. If I was gonna throw in anything else, it would just be kind of some cards from other colors. But the slots are tight. It's really, really hard to kind of take things out only having 10 sideboard cards. So if you guys have any opinions on the sideboard or any comments or questions or anything like that, leave them down below. But essentially, this is gonna be Jahmade with Opus Gaming. I'm out. Take care, you guys.